phenomenal justice to what it looked like, but as it's chasing you down the street, there's really no way to describe the feeling that you have trying to get away from the falling debris and the smoke and all the other materials that were flying through the air.
Were you able to breathe during that 2-minute period when it was just pitch black and the air was thick with smoke?
Luckily, the car that I was leaning against and kind of hiding behind was open, and I jumped in as soon as I could. It was very difficult breathing, and it was getting reasonably hot inside the car for lack of air. I don't believe that it was life-threatening, but it sure felt that way. I mean, there was no way to know what was going to happen next. We couldn't tell the trajectory of the building.
And water in the stairwell as well from the sprinklers?
Well, I didn't see no water because we were just running down the stairs, running on edge. The staircase was packed with people. We were just running down the stairs.
And when you got down and got out, what did you do then?
Well, they told us that they showed us exactly where to walk, so I was on 4th Street. And then a few minutes later, we just started running because the whole building collapsed after that. The whole building just came right down. So, and the smoke was so intense that we was running. We ran all the way to the Brooklyn Bridge just to get away from the smoke.
And what did you think when you turned around and saw the building coming down?
I said, oh my God, all those people.
Rescue teams work 12-hour shifts. Back-breaking, heart-wrenching work. From high-tech machinery to low-tech bucket brigades.
I think the anger's starting to hit us when we see the signs and we realize the useless death by
just on the basis
these
of
cowards.
history and on the basis of your own individual expertise, what do you think the chances are of the United States finding out who did this? First of all, you, Vince.
I think that there's a fairly good chance of finding out who did this because the people who did this are going to brag, they're going to talk, they're going to try and claim credit in a way that doesn't bring attention directly to them. But they will talk to other people, and some of our intelligence resources will pick this up, and that will lead us in a certain direction. And then they will go back to the database of threat warnings that they've had in the recent past. The U.S. has had a worldwide terrorism alert for some time, and it just renewed yesterday. But again, the focus of those threats was abroad, U.S. installations abroad. They'll go back and see whether or not some of their intelligence operations that were picking up these threats may have been the recipient of deception. In other words, the group that may have done this may have been broadcasting deceptive information.
Pat North, downtown. Pat, can you bring us up to date on the emergency efforts that are underway?
While they were really playing.
Well, at this point, Tom, literally hundreds of rescue workers are waiting to go in there. The problem for the authorities here, of course, is when can you send them in there? We are told by Port Authority officials that they are unable to send people actually into the debris of the building. However, they do have people on the perimeter, on the along the sides of the building, and they've been able to look there. There are still fires burning in there. We were told by somebody that was down there a little while ago that there were still fires burning in some areas of those buildings. Now, as we stand here, probably a good 6 to 7 hours after the buildings came down. Obviously, a very, very difficult circumstance and a big challenge for rescue officials here as to exactly when to go in there. As we discussed earlier, the problem that they have, of course, is when can they go in to search for survivors and yet still not put the rescuers themselves, many of whom, no doubt, from earlier this morning are casualties of the first events of the day, not put those rescue workers into danger themselves. So that is obviously the problem. We were told by a couple of people that were in there before rescue workers that there are bodies, a number of bodies lying around in the debris and on the street there. Obviously, part of the job will be to bring them out. We are also told by Port Authority officials that the building over there, which is building number 7, which you can see, it is referred to as building number 7. It's about, I would say probably a 20-story building, that there is some concern on the part of Port Authority officials about the stability of that building at this point. So obviously, as we have been discussing all day, a very, very difficult circumstance here as to exactly when that area really is going to be truly secure.
All the information we give you today as being preliminary at best. sometimes wrong. I think we've been pretty good about it today, and certainly confused, because listening to the mayor, listening to the governor of the state, both whom we talked to, listening to the senator in charge of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, listening to all of our analysts, listening to everybody, the country is still very much in the middle of, if not immediate post-event chaos, certainly in terms of trauma, and trying to get a handle on what the hell's been going on here.
This is the worst I've ever seen.
Attack the institutions of government. We're looking now at New York City, earlier photos of what was going on in the lower part of Manhattan, awaiting the president's return to Washington, D.C., and where he was going. There's a 40-story building that was near the Trade Center that is in danger of collapsing as well because of the shock of the explosion that was coincidental with the two towers coming down. 40 fire companies, we're told, are in the immediate area. Well, there were 40 fire companies in the immediate Trade Center area just before the towers collapsed. The great fear is that many of those of New York's finest were lost in that debris and all that rubble and the force. Amy, we're awfully glad that you're okay. Thank you for sharing this terrifying story with us today.
Okay, thank you.
That's probably the most we can hope for. It is a day of tremendous tragedy. The only thing that you can hope for is that we react to this in the right way.
We did have to, during World War II and during the Civil War, give up certain liberties, at least for the short term. Do you think that that's going to be what's going to happen this time as well?
Well, Tom, you know, there's no way to upset the American people any more than by telling them something that they have to do when they don't really want to. And that's true of any of us that try and rush through airports at the last minute. But, you know, it's very, very clear that we're going to have to make some adjustments in the way that we think about this.
I think we have Senator John McCain on the phone from Washington. Am I right, Senator?
Yes, Peter, how are you?
I'm well, sir, thank you. I'm not well. None of us are well. You know that.
Yes.
What's on your mind?
Well, I think that this act obviously is one which would constitute an act of war. I believe that the American people should remain calm and rally behind our president, and I'm confident that our military and our president will find out the perpetrators of this outrage, and we will not only punish those responsible, but
in terms of judicial prohibitions, in terms of the judicial restraints, are going to have to be relooked again, simply in light of this new heightened sense of vulnerability that we have in this country.
Mr. Allard, thank you very much.
What could possibly happen next? The FBI, within the last couple of years, has launched a very aggressive media campaign telling people that Washington, D.C. was right to be a target for terrorist attacks by people like terrorist Osama bin Laden. And here we are right now at ground zero, and people are concerned about what's going to happen next.
Were they surprised, Kerry, that he wasn't traveling under an assumed name?
I think they are, but clearly from what the indications are at this point, you know, these terrorists are not hiding, you know, after the fact or anything like that. I mean, I think that one of the agents told me that what he believes is that they wanted to leave this trail.
The count of the people who have died. Former President Clinton, who led the nation through the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, urged Americans today to rally behind President Bush in the aftermath of Tuesday's terrorist attack. He said, "We should not be second-guessing, we should be supporting him," he said in a telephone interview while traveling to Australia. He was stunned by what he saw going on to say the most important thing is we ought to be strong, calm, good Americans now, and rally behind the president and support the actions that he doubtlessly will take in the days ahead in the rescue and reconstruction of the area, and especially investigating and taking whatever action is necessary against those responsible. That, according to President Clinton, is traveling today, to bring you back up to date on a couple of matters. President Bush en route from Omaha, Nebraska, Offutt Air Force Base, which is south of Omaha, was teaching here at the headquarters after a National Security Council meeting via teleconferencing. He's now en route back to Washington, D.C. The President was in Florida this morning for an education and literacy event. Andy Card whispered in his ear that there had been a second attack on the World Trade Center, which held a wrong statement. Then left there to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, from there to Offutt. Let's listen for just a moment to what the President had to say today.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact.
That's President George W. Bush, who was speaking at that time from Louisiana. Then he went on to Omaha, and he's now on his way back to Washington, D.C. That's a very vivid account of what so many people went through, and as she indicated, there were so many people left in the building when it came down. Rob Bazell telling us the chilling story of a nurse online with her husband who was still in the building, and then the building came down. There were people in wheelchairs. CNBC's Ron Insana was down in the area when the building came down itself, and even those who were in the immediate surrounding area were in great danger.
Absolutely, Tom. The billowing smoke that rushed through the streets of Manhattan really enveloped several of us who were trying to get around the World Trade Center.
I know it's hard to believe, but again, you have to get back to the intensity of that fire.
That's probably the most that we can hope for. It is a day of tremendous tragedy. The only thing that you can hope for is that we react to this in the right way.
We did have to, during World War II and during the Civil War, give up certain liberties, at least for the short term. Do you think that that's going to be what's going to happen at this time as well?
Well, Tom, you know, there's no way to upset the American people any more than by telling them something that they have to do when they don't really want to. And that's true of any of us that try and rush through airports at the last minute. But, you know, it's very, very clear that we're going to have to make some adjustments in the way that we think about these things, simply as the price of living in a much more turbulent world than I think many of us had fully realized up until today. That's going to involve not only those kinds of things, it's going to involve some very, very tricky questions for the FBI and the various other agencies that are going to be pursuing this investigation. Very simply because of the fact that whatever the terrorists were that carried out this operation today had help within this country. And it's going to become an extremely difficult thing, and it's also very clear to me looking at this that some of what we have looked at before in terms of the judicial prohibitions, in terms of the judicial restraints, are going to have to be relooked again, simply in light of this new heightened sense of vulnerability that we have in this country.
I've ever seen in my entire life.
The buildings with the WTC prefix, you assert, were not destroyed by explosives of any kind, not TNT, not C4, not RDX, not thermite, not thermate, or nanothermate, correct?
That's correct, but you don't start with the answer. Part of the problem is to start with what happened. And that is the key feature here. As soon as you're fed the answer, you go cherry picking evidence to support your answer. But what happens if it's the wrong answer? You can't get there from you can't get to the truth from there.
Can I ask you how you were able to not cherry pick the answer, and how did you stay neutral?
Because of my experimental expertise in looking at what is before me. And looking at solving the first what. You know, the first engineering class that students take is statics. And I'm like a drill sergeant with requiring them to give the problem statement, what you're given in the problem, what you're looking for, how you're going about solving it. So you first have to define the problem, and that is the step that gets skipped here. Let's first have to define the problem, and that is the step that gets skipped here. Let's define the problem.
The line went dead after she said, "Can you believe this? We're being hijacked."
Ground, turn into dust. We know that because of the lack of debris. But also, if they slammed to the ground, there'd be a seismic signal that would reflect that. That didn't happen. There was a small one, but nothing anywhere close to the size it should have been. And Building 7...
New York City.
Can you just explain one thing? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I didn't know what you meant when you said interrogate what's going on. What does that mean?
Oh, just look at it, investigate, explore, study, focus on.
There's a 40-story building that was near the
determine, just really take apart every single detail of it, down to pretty fine levels of deformation analysis. And so I'm very familiar with structural properties and what things do and what causes them to do these things. And so I'm very familiar with structural properties and what things do and what causes them to do these things. And I'd never seen anything like what I saw in 9/11.
Debris and all that rubble and the force of that explosion.
Well, I could start out and say, for beginners who haven't encountered this before, to realize that the buildings did not burn up, nor did they slam to the ground, but they turned into dust in midair. Because if they had slammed to the ground, there'd be a big pile of stuff left over.
Wasn't there 1 million tons of building material in that building?
In just the 2 towers alone, and it wasn't just 2 towers. It was 4 towers, but 7 buildings altogether that were destroyed that day. There's the 2 towers, built WTC-1, WTC-2, and then there was the smaller tower, WTC-3, 22 stories. WTC-7 is 47 stories. And then WTC-4, half of it went missing. WTC-5 had cylindrical holes cut out of it. WTC-6, the center cylindrical portion, about 50% of the building went missing. So there's this bizarre, void of material that we saw, and it was only buildings with a WTC prefix, but all 7 of them were destroyed that day. Just taking in the observations of what happened, and it's probably pretty frustrating for a lot of people because they've been trained to jump to the answer. But again, as soon as you jump to the answer, you're making assumptions. You're making assumptions about what the problem is that you're solving. And by making those assumptions, you're solving a fictitious problem, not the real problem. So that's why it's so important to lay out what the problem is that you're solving. So, as I like to say, you keep looking at the evidence, and it'll tell you what happened. And you look at it long enough.
Just like any crime scene would inform the right investigator.
Right. And you look at it, and it keeps speaking to you. And I wrote my favorite quote in my book. It says, "If you listen to the evidence carefully enough, it will speak to you and tell you exactly what happened." If you don't know what happened, keep listening to the evidence until you do. The evidence always tells the truth. The key is not to allow yourself to be distracted away from seeing what the evidence is telling you.
There's so much evidence just in the first 12 chapters. I have to tell you that I took 8 pages of notes here.
What kind of extraordinary measures are going to have to be put in place besides beefing up security at the airports, in your judgment?
Well, Tom, life is going to change. I mean, not only are we going to see much more intrusive security at places like airports and other places where we gather in public, but we are also, I think, going to see some major changes in American foreign policy. We simply have to take another view of how we have fought terrorism. We have looked at this thing in terms of the criminal justice paradigm. In fact, the president said today that we're interested in bringing these people to justice. I think most Americans, once the shock fades, are less concerned about bringing them to justice than sending them to hell.